Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, January 9th, 2023. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Zelensky thanks the U.S. for a new $3 billion arms package. So this was on Friday. The U.S. pledged a new $3.075 billion weapons package for Ukraine that includes Bradley fighting vehicles for the first time, which Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, called an awesome Christmas present as it was announced on the eve of Orthodox Christmas. So, this aid marks the single largest arms package that the U.S. has pledged to Ukraine at one time since Russia's invasion. I mean, it's huge, over $3 billion, in military equipment in one package like this. I mean, that's almost what Israel gets every year from the US. And on Twitter, Zelensky thanked President Biden for what he called the all time defense package and said it was an awesome Christmas present for Ukraine that would bring a common victory for the US and Ukraine. So now this package is broken up. 2.85 billion of it is in Presidential Drawdown Authority, and that is the authority that gives Biden the power to send Ukraine weapons directly from U.S. military stockpiles. That's the fastest way they can ship it over there. They don't need to buy anything new; they just send it right over. And it also includes $225 million in the State Department's Foreign Military Financing Program, which provides foreign governments with funds to purchase U.S. made military equipment. And the U.S. announced even more aid on Friday. They announced $682 million in foreign military financing for its European allies. They didn't specify which countries, but the idea is they're going to give them this aid to backfill, as they put it, the military equipment that they've sent to Ukraine. So usually what that means is that, they're sending their older Soviet stuff to Ukraine, if they're one of the former Soviet states. And now the U.S. is going to give them some money to buy some new U.S. made equipment. So again, it's just a boon for the arms makers. So all these funds, it's just important to point out that this is being pulled from, funds that have already been authorized by Congress to spend on the war. Sometimes people think these weapons packages are piling up on the total, but that's not the case. Right now, it's still about $112 billion that Congress has authorized to spend on this war. The $45 billion aid package was the latest one, included in that huge omnibus. So the Pentagon, they put out a press release detailing all the weapons and ammunition and equipment that's included in this Presidential Drawdown Authority. I'll read some of it. It includes 50 of the Bradley infantry fighting vehicles, which we knew they were going to get. And that comes with 500 TOW anti-tank missiles and 250,000 rounds of 25 millimeter ammunition. That's the caliber gun that's on the Bradleys. It also includes 100 M113 armored personnel carriers, 55 mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles. Those are the MRAPs. 138 high mobility multi-purpose wheeled vehicles. So a lot of other vehicles here. 18 new howitzers and 18 ammunition support vehicles for the howitzers, 70,000 rounds of 155 millimeter artillery, 500 precision guided rounds of 155 millimeter artillery. This goes on and on. A lot of ammunition here, additional ammunition for the HIMARS rocket systems, a RIM 7 missile for air defense. I haven't heard of that. I don't know what system that's for. 4,000 Zuni aircraft rockets, 2,000 anti-armor rockets, and then smaller armed sniper rifles, machine guns, claymores, anti-personnel munitions, and then spare parts and stuff like that. So it's just a ton of stuff. And as I went over in the last episode, the Bradley vehicles are a significant escalation. They're designed to transport infantry troops with armored protection. And Germany and France have pledged to provide similar vehicles, but they still fall short of the Western-made heavy tanks that Ukraine wants, like the Abrams. Okay, so the next one here, Ukraine sanctions dozens of Russian artists for allegedly supporting the war, allegedly supporting Russia's war. So Ukraine on Saturday placed over 100 Russian artists and public figures on a sanctions list for their alleged support for the Russian invasion. So this list, it includes TV presenters, singers, and musicians who Mikhailo Podolyak, who's an advisor to Zelensky, he called them propagandists of death. And one of the most famous people on this list is an opera singer named Anna Netrebko, and she is based in Vienna. So she no longer lives in Russia, but she's come under criticism for allegedly supporting the war despite speaking out against the conflict. So that's why I use the word allegedly. So this is a statement that she put out right after Russia invaded Ukraine. Um, I just wanted to read it because it gives you an idea of, what the standard is, I guess. I'm not sure what it is, how much these people need to denounce the war to make Ukraine happy. But she said, quote, "I am opposed to this war. I am Russian and I love my country, but I have many friends in Ukraine, and the pain and suffering right now breaks my heart. I want this war to end and for people to be able to live in peace. This is what I hope and pray for." End quote. But she did also add that she does not think artists or public figures have to be forced to voice a certain political opinion. So that probably ruffled some feathers, but I think she makes a good point there. So these sanctions, what they do is they freeze any assets that these people have in Ukraine, and they are said to be in effect for at least 10 years. So again, it's a lot of people, a lot of singers and artists on there. And Ukrainian media also reported on Sunday that Zelensky revoked citizenship for 13 priests of the Russian-linked Ukrainian Orthodox Church. So this church cut ties with Russia after the invasion and denounced the war, but Kyiv claims that it still has ties to Moscow and recently started taking action against it. So we've seen a few things that Zelensky has done to take action against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. And earlier in December, he targeted 7 other priests with sanctions. But here he's revoking citizenship for 13 of them, I guess giving them no other choice but to go to Russia if they're still in Ukraine. So now this gets a little confusing because there's the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is historically has ties to Russia that Zelensky has been targeting. But there's also the Orthodox Church of Ukraine, which does not have ties to Russia, another Orthodox church in the country. So as part of the Zelensky's crackdown against the church with ties to Russia, although again, it's worth pointing out that they have severed those ties. They say they've severed those ties. The Ukrainian government, they took control of a 1,000-year-old cathedral in Kyiv, the Pezhyrsk Lavra, and they handed it over to this other Ukrainian Orthodox church that doesn't have ties to Russia. And they held Christmas service on there in the Ukrainian language for the first time ever. It's the other church does it in Russian. Zelensky himself grew up a Russian speaker. It's not just ethnic Russians that speak Russian. But Saturday, it marked the first time. Oh, I just said that. Sorry. So while this Ukrainian Orthodox Church is linked to Moscow, according to the numbers, it has a larger presence in Ukraine than the other one. According to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church website, and this is again the Russia-linked one, it has over 12,000 parishes in Ukraine, while the other church has about 7,000. All right. So the next one here, Putin's Christmas ceasefire does not hold. So the ceasefire ordered by Putin for Orthodox Christmas did not hold, as heavy shelling was reported in eastern Ukraine on Friday and Saturday. The ceasefire was to be held from noon on Friday through midnight on Saturday. The Russian military, they insisted that they did observe the ceasefire, but said that they had to respond to Ukrainian attacks. The Russian Defense Ministry said that Russian forces deflected Ukrainian attacks and killed more than 20 Ukrainian soldiers on Friday. So local Russian-backed authorities in Donetsk, they claim that Ukraine began shelling areas basically immediately after the ceasefire was supposed to take effect. They're saying Ukraine didn't abide by it at all. And Ukrainian officials rejected the ceasefire after Putin gave the order on Thursday, including Zelensky, but they did still blame Russia for the outset of the fighting. So Zelensky said in his nightly address on Saturday, quote, "The world was once again able to see today how false any words of any level that sound from Moscow are. They were saying something about a supposed ceasefire. The reality, however, was that Russian shells once again hit Bakhmut and other Ukrainian positions," end quote. So, I mean, I don't know. They reject the ceasefire, they call it a ploy, they denounce it, and then they blame Russia for violating it, even though who knows? It does look like Ukraine just didn't follow it at all. Um, and instead of encouraging a temporary pause in fighting in Ukraine, the US and other Western countries also rejected the ceasefire. And this really it gave a strong signal that the US and NATO are not going to be pushing for negotiations anytime soon. If this is the way they respond to a potential ceasefire, potential relief in fighting just for a short time. After Putin gave the order for the unilateral ceasefire, the State Department dismissed it as a cynical ploy and claimed that Russia was trying to use the 36-hour period to reinforce its troops. So I think that attitude really says a lot. All right, the next one here. Russia claims 600 Ukrainian troops are dead in missile strikes, but Kyiv denies that anyone was killed. So Russia said this on Sunday. They said they launched some missile strikes against Ukrainian troops, against two facilities in Donetsk that were housing 1,300 Ukrainian troops. And they're saying over 600 were killed, but Ukraine is denying that there was any casualties. So vastly different claims, which we're used to seeing, but this is like, way, way off, between 600 and zero. But the Russian Defense Ministry said that it was retaliation for the Ukrainian strike last week that killed at least 89 Russian soldiers. And in that strike, Ukraine used the U.S. provided HIMARS rocket systems. And after that one, Ukraine claimed they killed over 400 Russian soldiers, and then Russia confirmed 89 were dead. So again, very far, very different. So it's really tough to know with this one. I mean, it's really just impossible to know. Maybe more will come out about this. Maybe they'll eventually admit there were some casualties, or we won't hear anything else about it. It's always important to note, the restrictions Zelensky has put on media in Ukraine, but I think they would have a hard time hiding, 600 dead Ukrainian troops. So who knows? Maybe we'll find out in the future. But just because it was, Russia's claiming they killed 600, I thought it was noteworthy, to highlight. All right. Actually, I'm going to take this moment now to mention that it's our fundraiser again. And we really need your help to keep us going here at antiwar.com. We're entirely funded by our readers. And now, since I launched this new show, podcast, and video, we've gained some new listeners and supporters through that. And this is, how we get by. None of us make much money doing this. Your donations go directly to running the site, to paying the small staff that we have. And, if you just scroll down the site, I know I always just go through the news section, but, we have a ton of content, and there's not really any other sites when it comes to independent or alternative media specifically focused on foreign policy that, puts out this much content every day. So, if you appreciate this show and my news coverage, this is how I'm able to do it. It's because of antiwar.com. So if you go to antiwar.com/donate, you'll find different ways you can support us. And, we have had some big names, endorse us, and a lot of prominent journalists and researchers read antiwar.com. So we're not just, that's another big, plus to supporting us is that we're a resource for a lot of people, and our information has a very far reach. But we need your help. Antiwar.com/donate. So you'll be hearing from me about this for a while now that our next fundraiser is up and running. All right. So the next article, this is from Brett Wilkins. And this is an important one. Pentagon doc reveals that the U.S. lied about Afghan civilians killed in a 2021 drone strike. U.S. military officials knew that an August 2021 drone strike in Kabul likely killed Afghan civilians, including children, but lied about it, a report published Friday revealed. So this was when the U.S. was withdrawing from Afghanistan just a day or two before it was completed. Biden launched a drone strike in Kabul and slaughtered 10 innocent civilians, including 7 children. And if you remember at first, the U.S. military was saying that they killed ISIS-K planners or facilitators, but that turned out not to be the case. It was all civilians, and they were lying to us about it for a few days because this New York Times report reveals that they knew right away that they killed civilians, and they just still lied about it. So I'll just read some from the article here. Again, this is from Brett Wilkins. New York Times investigative reporter Azmat Khan analyzed a 66-page redacted U.S. Central Command report on August 29th. On the August 29th, 2021 drone strike that killed 10 members of the Ahmadi family, including 7 children, outside their home in the Afghan capital. The strike took place during the chaotic final days of the U.S. ground war in Afghanistan, just 3 days after a bombing that killed at least 182 people, including 13 American troops at Kabul's international airport. So Zamari Ahmadi, a 43-year-old aid worker for California-based nonprofit Nutrition and Educational International, was carrying water containers that were mistaken for explosives when his Toyota Corolla was bombed by a Lockheed Martin Hellfire missile fired from a General Atomics MQ-9 Reaper drone. As reports of civilian casualties began circulating hours after the strike, U.S. military officials claimed there were no indications that non-combatants were harmed in the attack, while stating that they would investigate whether a secondary explosion may have killed or wounded people nearby. However, the Times details that within minutes of the strike, CENTCOM realized civilians may have been killed, and within 3 hours, they had assessed that at least 3 children were killed. So they knew pretty much right away, but they kept lying about it. U.S. military officials initially called it a righteous strike, and that was General Mark Milley. I believe that was 3 days after the strike. So 3 days after they knew, he was still calling it a righteous strike, but they later admitted that it was a horrible mistake. And the only reason why they admitted it is because so many eyes were on this city. As the U.S. was withdrawing, there's a huge Western media presence on the ground. And reporters went there, and there was tons of video evidence, and they analyzed everything, and that's why they apologized. And it's important because it shows that they're willing to lie about this. And when we talk about airstrikes in other places like Somalia, which we're going to get into in the next article, we have no idea what's happening there. And same thing when it comes to even the U.S. airstrikes against against ISIS. In Syria and Iraq, U.S. Central Command said they killed, I think it was over 600 ISIS fighters in 2022 for the whole year. But we don't know. A lot of them could have been civilians. It's not like they stood trial. So I think this really shows how even when they know, they're just going to lie about it. So this next article here, U.S. airstrikes in Somalia increased by 30% in 2022. So this is from the Military Times, and this is as the Biden administration has escalated its involvement in the war against al-Shabaab. So this is according to data compiled by the Long War Journal, which is a project of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, which is a very hawkish think tank, but these numbers are good because you could pretty much look at U.S. AFRICOM's press releases and just add them up. So they launched at least 15 airstrikes in Somalia in 2022. This is AFRICOM, and this is up from 11 airstrikes in 2021. And this is just the ones that AFRICOM, is reporting. It's possible CIA drone strikes could be occurring in the country, and we wouldn't know about those. So U.S. airstrikes in Somalia, they initially dropped under President Biden, and it was one of the few bright spots of his first year in office, that and pulling out of Afghanistan. But and so there was 11 airstrikes in 2021, but about half of them were launched in January 2021 in the final days of the Trump administration. They're really getting all their airstrikes in. So Trump really ratcheted up the airstrikes in Somalia. In 2020, there was 45 U.S. airstrikes, and in 2019, there was 59. So you see how high the levels they were at in the Trump administration. So Biden came in and they did drop. But in 2022, Biden ordered the deployment of up to 500 troops to Somalia and stepped up airstrikes as the U.S.-backed Mogadishu-based government began an offensive against al-Shabaab. There was heavy fighting on the ground during the final months of 2022 when many U.S. airstrikes took place. I believe most of them took place at the second half of 2022. And AFRICOM claimed that they killed 107 al-Shabaab fighters in 2022 in all these airstrikes, but they didn't report any civilian deaths. And again, we don't know. There's no way to know because the Pentagon is known for undercounting civilian casualties. We know that they lie, and their operations in Somalia are shrouded in secrecy. There's no Western media presence on the ground, and the U.S.-backed government of President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed has strict rules for local journalists. They have to get everything. They just passed a new law where they have to, approve their coverage of this war against al-Shabaab. So al-Shabaab has also stepped up its attacks. They claimed responsibility for a car bombing in Somalia's central Haran region that killed 35 people last week. One hopeful sign is that Mohammed's government said on Saturday that al-Shabaab is open to negotiations, signaling that there might be an attempt at diplomacy between the warring parties. Just a little background, al-Shabaab is an al-Qaeda affiliate, but it's widely believed, anybody who knows anything about Somalia says that they're not a global threat. They don't have ambitions outside of Somalia. And they used to have kind of ambitions into Kenya. They didn't really recognize the what they call the international borders of Somalia, even though Somalia is already divided. The U.S.-backed government doesn't control the whole territory of Somaliland in the north and then the areas that al-Shabaab controls. But according to this analyst that I linked to here, they say now al-Shabaab recognizes those borders and they're not going to go outside of those borders, so that the time for negotiations is kind of ripe. And just the al-Shabaab, their first recorded attack was in 2007, and it wasn't until 2012 that they pledged loyalty to al-Qaeda. That attack in 2007 was an attack against an Ethiopian troops occupying Mogadishu, and the U.S. backed an Ethiopian invasion in Somalia in 2006 that ousted the Islamic Courts Union, which was like a coalition of Islamic groups that ruled over Somalia, that had power in Somalia for a brief time, but they were knocked out by the U.S.-backed invasion. And then al-Shabaab was the more radicals of the Islamic Courts Union. And then they started attacking Ethiopian troops. So they were fighting the U.S. and its proxies for years before they declared loyalty to al-Qaeda. All right, the next article here. Sweden says that it cannot meet some of Turkey's demands to join NATO. So this might be good news. So this is Ulf Kristersson. He's the Swedish prime minister, the new Swedish prime minister. He said on Sunday that Turkey has made demands for Sweden that it cannot fulfill as part of Ankara's conditions for the Nordic nation to join NATO. Kristersson said, quote, "Turkey confirms that we have done what we said we would do, but they also say they want things that we can't and won't give them. So the decision is now with Turkey," end quote. And he was sworn in as prime minister in October. So Sweden and Finland, they signed a deal with Turkey to join NATO last June, but Turkey's parliament still hasn't approved their membership. Ankara says that its main problems with the two countries is their alleged support for the PKK, which is the Kurdish militant group that they consider a terrorist organization. Not just Turkey, but also the US and the EU. Turkey is seeking the extradition of suspected PKK members and other individuals from Sweden, but so far, Stockholm has only extradited one person. Sweden's Supreme Court also blocked the extradition of a Turkish journalist wanted by Turkey for his alleged role in a failed coup. Kristersson said that Sweden was fulfilling the deal it signed with Turkey, but said it has to follow its deportation laws. And if you look at the deal they signed, it didn't explicitly say that they had to extradite everybody Turkey wanted. It just said that they have to respond to Turkey's extradition requests. So Turkey appears to have more demands of Sweden. Sweden seems to be the big issue, but Sweden and Finland have said that their memberships are linked and that they would only join together. And Finland's foreign minister kind of reiterated this on Sunday. So if Sweden joins Finland, if Sweden doesn't join, Finland won't join. And internal Turkish politics could be at play in Turkey's delay. Their next presidential election is going to be held in June, so that's coming up. Western officials have said that they expect Erdogan, the Turkish president, to delay approving Sweden and Finland's NATO bids for several more months at least, because he's looking to get concessions, as many concessions as he can get as possible before the election. Hungary, they're also the only other NATO member that has yet to approve Sweden and Finland joining the alliance, but their parliament is expected to vote on the issue in the coming weeks. I believe they said in February. And Orban, he said, the Hungarian leader, he said that they approve it, that they're going to approve them joining, but they're expected to approve it. But it looks like Erdogan, he's really going to kick this down the road, which is good because, Sweden and Finland joining NATO is really going to raise tensions in the region. Finland shares an over 800-mile border with Russia. That's going to be totally militarized if this happens. So let's hope he keeps delaying it. All right, the last article here, this is from Jason Ditz. The Venezuelan embassy in the U.S. closes as the opposition crumbles. So the Venezuelan embassy in Washington, D.C. has followed up on the ouster of opposition figure Juan Guaido, announcing that they will close the facility. This effectively caps the U.S. policy of the last several years. In early 2019, the U.S. started backing Guaido as the leader of Venezuela, recognizing him as head of state and moving to oust the actual president, Nicolas Maduro. This included seizing revenue. This is, their offshore assets, setting up pro-Guaido forces in the embassy in the United States, as well as other countries allied with the U.S. They also handed their embassies over to this opposition that didn't actually have any power in Venezuela. And while the regime change was a pet plan of former President Trump, the Biden administration says the policy is not changing and all sanctions will remain in place. And it's not totally clear what that means, as the administration, they just don't want, it seems like they don't want the public expecting the State Department to, normalize with Maduro. They want it to seem like they have this hardline position still. And this is definitely, at the same time, really, the U.S. says that they haven't changed the policy. They don't recognize Maduro. They're going to keep sanctions in place, but things are happening. Maduro says he wants normalization, and the U.S. has eased sanctions very slightly by giving Chevron a license to restart pumping oil. So we'll just see how this goes, but I do think that they are going to slowly lift more sanctions. And it's not about helping out the people of Venezuela who have been crushed by these sanctions, because as sanctions always do, they hurt the ordinary people, not the leaders or the governments that they're supposed to hurt. It's just, people want to do business in Venezuela, oil companies, and just in general, the financial world wants to be investing in Venezuela. And they also want to get more oil out on the global market, although prices have dropped, but that's also a big part of it. Anyway, that's it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. We have one from Jonathan Cook about Ben-Gvir. Is he preparing a holy war against the Palestinians? One from Edward Lozansky, Lies, Democracy, Foreign Policy, and the Search for Peace. We have one from Max Blumenthal, links over to his website, The Gray Zone, Zelensky's delegation led by economic hitwoman who led the plunder of Ukraine. So go check that out. Also, Dan Steinbach, The Long-Term Economic Implications of the Ukraine War. That's over at the American Conservative. And then we have a really great spotlight from Kelly Vlahos over at Responsible Statecraft about the foreign policy elites, what they really think about you. So go check that out. That's a good one. But that's everything. And, that's another great thing about antiwar.com is that, we don't just have all this original content. We also always link to, the best stories, foreign policy news or opinion stories that we can find on the internet. Fortunately, the news is really tough to come by. That's why I got to write so many articles. But there's a lot of good opinion pieces out there, like Kelly and Max Blumenthal at the Gray Zone, and we find that stuff and we put it together for you. And we it doesn't matter their people's political where they fall on the political spectrum. We run stuff from people all over, left, right, conservative, liberal, whatever you want to call yourself, just as long as they're anti-war, anti-intervention. So that's what we're about. So support us. But that's it for me for today. Again, antiwar.com/donate. And if you can't afford to donate, share the show, share the website, tell people about it. That really helps too. That's it for me for today. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.